The lights are on, but at a cost. A hefty 6 billion rand, says Eskom. In the last 6 months, the utility has burnt through billions of rands on diesel to prevent load shedding. And this has caught the attention of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, SCOPA. SCOPA wants to see for themselves, and it started with a site visit to the Medupi power station yesterday, and they're meeting with Eskom officials today to discuss the utility's performance, but more importantly, its spending. Tomorrow, the committee will also focus on the derailed Passenger Rail Agency of South Africa, PRASA, and that follows the Auditor General's identification of material non-compliance in areas like procurement, expenditure management, and consequent management. The chair of that committee is also the leader of Rise Mzansi, Songezo Zibi, who joins us now on the line. Always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for your time this morning.
Good morning, Bongani, and thank you very much for having me on this morning.
So firstly, you and I go back some time. I've interviewed you many a time. And as somebody who's watched the numbers from the outside, specifically now, I'm reminded of your time as the editor of the Business Day. Now that you're on the inside as part of this grand coalition, what's your sense of the public purse?
So the public purse, Bongani, is not in a good state. And I think this is something that South Africans really have to grapple with, because we have to make some very big choices in the coming months and in the coming years. Because what we have seen is that during the years of state capture, unfortunately, we borrowed a lot of money as a country for which we continue to pay, and the goods or the infrastructure for which we paid those monies is still not here. Case in point, I know we're talking about Transnet today, about Eskom today, but Transnet bought over 1,000 locomotives from China, if you recall.
Yes, of course.
That arrangement was riddled with corruption. Today, Transnet, part of the 1 billion rand a month Transnet pays in servicing that debt is for those locomotives. And those locomotives aren't here, Bongani. So we borrowed money. We're servicing that debt. Transnet is servicing that debt. The locomotives are not here. The ports are clogged. The railway system is under invested in, and so on. So we have to make these big choices about what do we do. The point is we need to spend more money, unfortunately, to make things work, because the money that we spend already, a lot of it has gone to waste.
I mean, you once gave me the analogy of a frog in hot water, how it stays or jumps out of the water depending on when it was placed in the pot. Are we still that proverbial frog? You mentioned this Transnet deal. I mean, there were efforts to go to China. I think Pravin Gordhan, the late minister, went to China to try and get that deal sort of unclogged, if you will. And yet here we are all these years later, nothing's changed.
Look, I think from the government's point of view, I think there is now a realization that, we can't sit and stare and admire the problem anymore. Things have to be done. But in my view, things aren't moving fast enough. They're not moving fast enough in government. They're not moving fast enough in parliament, and that is going to continue to cost the economy. Just on the Transnet issue, there are SARS issues involved, tax issues. There are also exchange control issues. Those remain unresolved. This is one of the reasons we've invited Minister Barbara Creecy to come to parliament during October when parliament resumes, so that we can discuss these matters and understand what the government's urgent solution thereto is going to be.
Eskom has kept the lights on. We're grateful for that. But boy, oh boy, it's been at a cost. They're also saying they're now tied into multi-million rand contracts with independent power producers for years to come. They've basically been trapped into buying power they purchased in emergency conditions, and now there's more supply than demand.
Well, there are many policy issues, and again, we are going to have the Minister of Electricity to come in. I'll make a few examples. So one of the decisions that the African government took was that it would procure the renewable energy, and Eskom would have to take it. So Eskom doesn't do the procurement. The Department of Energy is now electricity does, but it used to be the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy. Eskom does not have they are not the final arbiters of this. They are now stuck because the performance of the coal fleet has improved from where it was. It's still not where it needs to be, but it has improved from where it was then. There are these take or pay arrangements. So even if Eskom does not need the electricity, they must still pay for it. That's number one. Number two, there are some government guarantees tied to some of these investments, which means on the country's balance sheet, it's a potential liability that it has, and it makes our debt expensive. Problem number 3 that I can give you from Medupi, for instance. Remember, Medupi was delayed by some time, and the Exaro mine next door was built and it started producing before Medupi could start operating. Medupi now has about 14 million tons of coal over and above its requirement. It's stockpiled at Medupi, and until such time the matter is resolved, Eskom is going to continue to buy coal it no longer needs. And we have to be careful with these decisions, because if we say the coal should not be supplied anymore, we have to think about the people working the mine who might be laid off and that kind of thing. So those are some of the solutions that need to be found, Bongani, and found urgently.
Lots of complexity, lots of layers. You were at Medupi yesterday. What was your impression? And do these oversight visits work? I'm reminded of our mothers and our aunties and how they used to do spring cleaning when the visitors were coming.
No, look, I'm sure there is a bit of that that happens. But I think what is important is that Parliament does not visit installations once and then it never goes again. I think for the very critical infrastructure areas, the road, the transport logistics infrastructure, for instance, is really important, whether that is Transnet or PRASA or SAA or SANRAL, as you can see, or the Road Accident Fund. That's very important infrastructure. It's important for that and Eskom, for the committee to keep going back to check on the same issues that they raised last time to see how well or badly management is doing. And this coal issue that I'm talking about, for instance, is one of the examples of the issues that were identified last time. Could see that it's still unresolved. Nobody has been talking about it recently. We need to surface it again and raise it with the minister to make sure that it is solved. So, yes, they do work.
Let's talk about PRASA. The Auditor General, as I said in my introduction, identified material non-compliance in a number of areas. I want to quote you from something that Corruption Watch wrote about the issues that plague PRASA, and I quote now: "A number of problems at PRASA led to the audit outcome, and these include instability in key positions, poor financial management and discipline, inadequate oversight, no consequence management, and inadequate governance records, amongst others." End quote. That, Songezo, was in 2022. I suspect they would not say much that is different today.
Well, the Auditor General was in Parliament some weeks ago to talk about PRASA, and their overall assessment was that the picture is improving at PRASA. It's not where it needs to be, but there are some areas where it has improved. They clearly identified areas where we have to raise some issues with PRASA. But again, there are several issues there. There is the IT environment that in 2022-2023 was said to be really poor. We have to understand that. We have to understand the state of the infrastructure. We're even going to ride a train, visit some depots and so on. We have to understand what happened with the chief executive, this litigation that went on for years. With two
and other executives. Yeah.
And other executives. So we have to understand those issues. But the fact that the Auditor General says the picture is improving shows you how bad things have been before, because even now, things are not where they're supposed to be.
If this is the improvement.
Yeah, exactly. So the point I'm making is that the only way these institutions are going to turn around is if the attention does not switch off. It's always on.
You mentioned Minister Creasy, who's acknowledged the poor state of our transport infrastructure more broadly, shoddy roads, a rail and freight system in shambles. She's promised a new 5-year strategic plan. Are you hopeful?
I am hopeful, Bongani, but there is one thing, South Africans, and I really want listeners and my colleagues in Parliament and everybody to carefully understand this. There are budget cuts at the moment. Right across. At other times, Bongani, you talk about cutbacks on teachers and other areas, right? The South African government, unfortunately, the last 15 years of South Africa has meant that the money to invest in these things is no longer there. We have 2 choices or 3 choices. One, we go and we borrow more, which means repaying debt becomes the highest expenditure item on our budget. Secondly, we create rules for the involvement of the private sector so that we use some of their money. That's number 2. Number 3, we use a combination of the 2. What we can no longer do is to pretend that we've got all the jewels in our hands when we don't. And we sit like this, like that frog I was talking about so many years ago, because things will get worse, whether you've got a government you call the GNU or not, they will get worse. We must make choices. We must grow up as a country and make choices and make them urgent.
Songezo Zibi, appreciate your time, the chairperson of Parliament's Standing Committee on Public Accounts. As I said to Songezo, my sense for a long time has been that the public purse is treated as if it is monopoly money. Do you agree? And how do we change this?
Current events, developing stories,
tough questions.
Your voice making a difference.
This is Breakfast with Bongani Bingwa.